It is September 29th, 2025, and Iran is now being hit with snapback sanctions 10 years after the landmark nuclear deal that helped remove those sweeping sanctions. But now you have the West in a position where, led by the US, of course, they're not too happy about the fact that Iran is not allowing international inspectors to come and look at their nuclear facilities. Of course, that was part of the deal. But then again, the West, also led by the US, hasn't exactly been following this nuclear deal for a number of years now. And you also have Iran in a position where we have to remember that they were just attacked by the US and Israel just a few months ago. So where do tensions stand? Is there any sort of hope for diplomacy for a future deal? And what should we be concerned about when it comes to plans by the US and Israel to launch another attack? And what could that mean for the response we see from Iran this time around as they continue to escalate with their retaliation each time? We got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier. And just a quick note here, if the format of this interview looks a little bit different, I had to use different software to record it. Unfortunately, with guests in Iran, the internet, the US really has us jumping through some hoops. So just know that a lot of work goes into these interviews. I am more than happy to do it. I'm happy to be able to talk to people on the ground in Iran, especially at a time when I know that the US government is not too thrilled about it. So thank you to all of you who are here, who are watching this interview, who are continuing to support my work. And now, without further ado, let's take a listen to today's conversation. Joining me now to discuss is Dr. Foad Izadi, an author and associate professor in the Department of American Studies at the University of Tehran. Dr. Izadi, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you.
I'm glad I get to talk to you today. I know that there is a lot going on, but I want to start with the news that it has, of course, been nearly 10 years since a landmark nuclear deal was implemented and sweeping sanctions against Iran were lifted. And now they have returned after the UK, France, and Germany activated the so-called snapback mechanism. Will you start by telling us how you see the current tensions and just how much of a step back are these sanctions that are now being reinforced against really the Iranian people?
Hurting the people, especially the lower segments of society. The sanctions that are causing serious difficulties are American sanctions. So the oil sanctions, the banking sanctions are passed by the United States Congress. The UN sanctions are not generally on Iran's economy. So they deal with weapon purchases, they deal with Iran's nuclear program. So they're not going to add significantly to the difficulties that sanctions bring because the American sanctions are so extensive. What Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan, Algeria have said is that the Europeans cannot bring back a snapback because they cannot bring back the sanctions because they are not participating in the nuclear agreement. The United States officially left the agreement 7 years ago, and the Europeans followed that lead. They didn't leave the agreement officially, but they stopped doing what they were supposed to do under the agreement. And after 7 years, they remembered that there was this nuclear agreement, and they like 2 articles in that agreement, the snapback articles. So they want to basically bring these UN sanctions on Iran as a way of punishing Iran after Iran was attacked in a few months ago by the United States and Israel. So the Europeans are doing their part in terms of causing difficulties for Iran.
It's always interesting how the Europeans come in and they do what the US wants, right? They do essentially what they're told to do. And when you look at the way that this is being communicated in the West, they point to the fact that one of the key requirements under the nuclear deal was that Iran give international inspectors access to its nuclear facilities. But as you were noting, that backfired on Iran when the US and Israel then used it against them to launch attacks earlier this year. So how do you view the position that Iran is in right now? And is this does this seem like it's Washington's goal to put them in this difficult position where the West can say, oh, well, they need to allow these inspectors and they need to, do all of these things on the checklist, while the US and Europe, they're certainly not holding up their end of the deal and have not been for a while now?
When Iran was attacked in June by Israel first and then United States, we had IAEA, UN inspectors in Iran doing their job. The sites that were attacked were under IAEA inspection, all of them. These are declared sites that have been under inspection since the time they were built. And the IAEA inspectors, the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, had to leave Iran for their own safety. The flights were canceled, so they went to Armenia, the neighboring country in the north, and that's how they left Iran. Iran was negotiating with the United States. The Israeli attacks came 2 days before the next round of negotiations. It seems the United States and Israel were engaging in a deception operation, because until the last minute, Trump was tweeting about the negotiations were going well. He was expecting good results. Steve Witkoff was supposed to be in Oman for the 6th round. They had announced that they will be there. And then you suddenly had the Israeli attack with the help of the United States. So given that experience, the Iranian leaders are hesitant about how they can deal with the other side, because the other side talks about the negotiating table, and then they attack suddenly without any warning to make sure that they have this element of surprise. The name of the American attack was Midnight Hammer. And what Trump did was he took the hammer and smashed the negotiation table. And this is the current situation. I don't know if you saw the exchange between the Russian and the French ambassador at the UN Security Council a couple of nights ago. The Iranian foreign minister at the UN Security Council meeting said that Iran had actually reached an agreement with France. And then when France took that agreement to the United States to get the US approval, it was rejected. So the Russian ambassador was basically mocking the French ambassador, saying that the United States is the big brother, and the French had to get the permission from the big brother. The permission didn't come, so the agreement that was reached between Iran and France was stopped. So the Europeans I think, are getting in line with U.S. foreign policy, at least when it comes to Iran. I think they want other things from the United States, and they think by supporting U.S. policy towards Iran, they may be able to be on the good side of the Americans, the U.S. officials, so they can work with them on other issues that they have concern about.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see there, even when there is the dialogue between France and Iran, right? When France is trying to work things out, you're right. The US does this time and time again, where it comes in and it says, no, actually, this is how things are going to be. Now, I know that even in the aftermath of these attacks that were carried out by the US and Israel in June, you still had the Iranian government, you had President Pezeshkian in this place where he's saying, hey, we want to have talks, we're open to negotiations. How do you view the position that Iran is in right now when it comes to those potential talks, especially when the other side of the table, whether, it's not necessarily France, it's not any of these countries, it is the United States and it is the Trump administration, which has shown time and time again that it cannot be trusted, even when talks are ongoing?
The Pezeshkian belongs to the reformist camp in Iran. He won the election by saying that he's interested in negotiating with the United States. He wanted to reach an agreement with the United States. I think he realized that for the US to return to the nuclear agreement is not a serious option, but he was hoping to see some other type of agreement. And then Trump got elected, and these talks started. The attacks came in June, and even after the attacks, his administration is not giving up on negotiating with the United States. He was in New York just a couple of days ago. Had a few interviews. In all the interviews, he said that Iran is willing to negotiate. The Trump administration is unwilling to take a yes answer from Iran. So no matter what the Iranian officials say, the Trump administration rejects. And I think what they are planning is the next round of attacks on Iran. I don't think they are really interested in a negotiated agreement with Iran. They think they can deal with Iran militarily. And it seems Netanyahu is basically dictating US policy when it comes to Iran. They have given Netanyahu a blank check. He decides what's going to happen next, and Trump accepts and follows Netanyahu's lead. And this is how the United States got into a military confrontation with Iran.
Yeah, and speaking of that sort of next attack, I know that things kind of right now feel like they are at a bit of a standstill, right? Because even though we had an end to the attacks that were carried out, there wasn't any kind of peace deal. There wasn't even really necessarily a ceasefire. It was just Iran said, hey, we're done with our retaliation. The US and Israel didn't launch any new attacks on their end, and so there wasn't the need to retaliate further. So when it comes to your concerns about what those next attacks could look like, what are you kind of keeping an eye on, especially as I know you've got analysts out there saying right now that they're very wary that something could happen even as early as before Christmas?
I think that's a serious possibility. Last time, Iran was surprised because they didn't think the Americans would attack in the middle of negotiations. At this time, they are not going to be. So they're getting prepared. I think the number of people who will lose their lives would be much greater. This is going to be a more serious military confrontation. And I think one option that Iranian leaders think about is hitting US bases in a more serious manner. Last time, it is reported that they told the Trump administration that the US base in Qatar is going to be hit. They told the Trump administration in advance. I'm not sure if they're going to do that again. If Iran is attacked again. The calculus here is that if attacking Iran is cost-free, then these type of attacks will continue by Israel or United States or both. So the logic here is that they need to create some sort of a cost to make sure that the country stays safe. We have a population of over 90 million people, and they look towards the government for their safety. And if you're a politician in Iran, you need to make sure that the country is not attacked again in the manner that it was last time.
Yeah, and I know that part of that attack, it wasn't just coming from the outside, it was also coming from the inside. And that is something that Israel tends to do, right? They want there to be that psychological warfare, that belief that you can't trust anyone around you, that there are going to be spies all around, and that they are going to launch attacks from inside your own country. When it comes to the way that you've watched the Iranian government respond since June, I know they have targeted a lot of these spies and that they are really working overtime to try to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. How do you see it, and how do you see kind of the lessons that they've learned from this last version of war, especially as we look at possibly going into the next phase or another attack?
Iran is a large country. It's not as big as the United States, but if you put Iran on a U.S. map, it covers a good portion of the U.S. Territory. Long borders with countries like Afghanistan that don't have a serious central government. So it's not very difficult to infiltrate Iranian borders because of the size of the country. And you're right. We had Israeli reports saying that over 100 Mossad agents were inside Iran doing operations during the 12-day of military attacks on Iran. These are lessons that Iranian government officials are looking at. They want to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen. The calculus here is that if the cost of attacking Iran for the United States is large enough, then that may deter the next attack by the United States. The calculus here is that the Israelis know that Iranians have ballistic missiles. They would use these ballistic missiles. But what we understand from the Israeli leaders is that they don't have respect for human life, whether the person is Muslim, Christian, or Jew. So they're willing to have casualties as long as they can achieve some foreign policy goal. When Iranian missiles hit Israel, you get damaged buildings. They can rebuild. They get, some people get killed. If you don't have concerns about human lives, then that's an acceptable cost for the Israelis. And this is why another war against Iran is a serious possibility.
Yeah, and when you look at the way that, and I know that another part of this, we also look at someone like Netanyahu, and kind of as you were noting before, where he seems to be at the forefront. Obviously, he's dealing with not only corruption charges, but he's also at the head of Israel waging an all-out genocide, targeting the Palestinian people. And so he's juggling all of these things while at the same time desperate for some kind of war with Iran, no matter really what that looks like. And the US is in this position where they still have not seen, or at least they don't think that they've seen, a cost that is going to make it worth it to not pursue some sort of military action against Iran. It doesn't seem like, when you look at some of these players in the Trump administration and the statements that they make, they seem to want war, and more war. But yet we look back in decades past, and I know that the US establishment as a whole, they have wanted war with Iran for a long time, but they also understood that Iran wasn't Iraq, it wasn't Afghanistan. This is not going to be some, easy war that you get involved in. Yeah, it's going to be an endless war. So how do you look at this position that the US is in now, where they may be willing to sign on to some of these attacks, but do you think that they would be dumb enough to throw themselves into an endless war against Iran that would impact not only the region, but also the global economy?
They have done it once. Netanyahu may convince Trump to do it again. The main problem that a good number of US officials have with Iran is Iran's support for the Palestinian cause, because since 1979, since the revolution. American officials have been telling Iran that if you lower your support for the Palestinian cause, all the sanctions would go away, all the difficulties would go away. And Iranian officials have not bought that argument because they understand that the Israelis are interested in expansion. Even Netanyahu talked about greater Israel a few weeks ago. So what Iran is doing is defending Iran. Iran is also defending the Palestinian cause. And Iran is one of the few countries that is seriously working towards stopping the genocide in Gaza. So Iran is fighting for Iran, and Iran is fighting for humanity. You are not supposed to be watching a genocide as a country. You are not supposed to be supporting the genocidal side. You are not supposed to just issue statements. You need to do something more, and this is the crime that Iran has committed. They have supported the Palestinian cause in a more serious manner. And this is the main difficulty. This is why you have this agreement between American and Israeli officials that they need to cut the head of a snake. This is they call Iran the head of a snake, and they want to destroy Iran in that manner. I think their plan is to balkanize Iran. They're interested in Iran disintegrating into a smaller state, and they have more than 3 years to do that. They think that Trump will give them a blank check. And this is going to be quite dangerous because Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a much larger country, much larger population, and indigenous technology. The technology is made internally. So the hope is that cooler heads, maybe in the US military, maybe in the foreign policy establishment, realize that engaging Iran in this type of military confrontation is not good for the United States' interest. What is good for Netanyahu may not even be good for Israel. For Netanyahu, continuation of an endless war is good because he manages to stay out of jail by continuing this type of military confrontations. But that's good for him, not for anyone else.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And you look at what Iran is standing for versus what so many other countries are standing for when it comes to their support. And I know that the US is at the forefront of the support for this genocide. And you see every single day as the death toll continues to grow, as Israel continues to carry out these horrific war crimes one after another against the Palestinian people. And when you look at the position that Iran is in and everything that it is not only fighting against with the US and Israel, but also fighting for in this multipolar world. And I know that the goal of the US was to, isolate Iran from the rest of the world, right? To cause chaos inside the country. But, we saw it back in, well, I say we, everyone that I've talked to in Iran back in June had said they were really emphasizing the unity, right? The fact that when Iran was under attack, the people within the country were coming together. They were realizing that, hey, we are the ones being targeted. And instead of, turning on their government or turning on each other, they were looking at ways that they could work together. When it comes to what you've seen just in Iranian society, can you speak to that and kind of to what the view is when it comes to another possible attack coming from the US and Israel and how people are even just mentally preparing for that?
We have this rally around the flag effect. With this UN sanctions, the propaganda that comes with it, we had the value of Iranian currency devaluated. So this is going to bring more economic pressure. But there is this culture of resistance as well. And people realize that their government, the Pezeshkian government, is doing all they can to lower tensions with the other side. So when Iran was attacked in the middle of negotiations, they did not blame the Pezeshkian government, they blamed Trump and Netanyahu. Even people who did not think very well about the government, they had disagreements, they opposed government, they realized that this is more than who's running Iran. This is about the country itself. And Iranians, like other people, like the country they were born in. And they don't want to be part of a regime change, a scheme by a genocidal maniac in Tel Aviv. And the idea of regime change really backfired. So the people who were supposed to change the government here realized that with all the difficulties that they have with the government, they don't want a puppet American Israeli government to replace what they have now, because they realize that that is also not going to be good for Iran. So I think the Israelis and the Americans made serious mistakes. They, although they killed more than 1,000 civilians, they hit a lot of sites in Iran. But the national unity that they brought to Iran has not been experienced here for many years.
Yeah, and that's good to know, especially as we're kind of in this place looking at, what is the next potential attack going to look like, right? How are the US and Israel going to try to target Iran moving forward? Because we know that they're not done yet. But when we look at even just the position that Israel is in, and I know that they felt the destruction that was caused by the Iranian retaliation in June, but yet that still doesn't seem to be enough to stop them. So when it comes to the position that Iran is in and kind of what you've been talking about, look, there has to be a cost, right? You can't just attack Iran and then walk away and then do it again. There has to be a retaliation from Iran that is enough to get the US and Israel to not attack again, while at the same time, I know that Iran is also in this place of trying to weigh the fact that Israel does have nuclear weapons, and there's always that fear that someone in Israel is going to take things too far. So how do you view the position that Iran is in when it comes to a potential future retaliation and weighing how far do we go and how far do we get into this war, while at the same time questioning, is this next phase going to be what draws us into that endless war, or are we going to keep seeing this back and forth? I guess if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say.
That is the reason people are worried about the future, because they realize that the other side has a lot of money. The US military spending is more than 100 times when you compare that to Iran. As you said, both United States and Israel have nuclear weapons. The country's leader a few days ago spoke and said that we continue the policy of not wanting to build a nuclear weapon. This was actually the outcome of a US intelligence community assessment in March. Tulsi Gabbard, the head of DNI, the director of national intelligence, went to the US intelligence committee in the Senate, in the US Congress, and presented that report. It's available online. It says, this is before the June attacks, this is in March. It says three things about Iran's nuclear program. The first thing is that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. The second thing is that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon program. And the third thing is that Iranian leaders have not decided to have a nuclear weapon program. And when Trump was asked about that report before attacking Iran, and the report that she had and the US intelligence community had, Trump's response was just two words: "She's wrong," and talking about the director of national intelligence. So it seems the Trump administration is very much in line with what Netanyahu wants, ignoring U.S. intelligence community reports, and just basically doing what Netanyahu wants. And, when Trump came into office this time and the last time, the main slogan was "America First." And a lot of people in Iran are wondering about that statement. It seems when it comes to Iran, it's Israel first.
Yeah, and I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around as we continue to watch what the US and Israel are going to do, watch how Iran is going to respond, and watch, where this conflict goes from here. But I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to get into and to explain all of the latest here. Dr. Foad Izadi, an author and associate professor in the Department of American Studies at the University of Tehran. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Anytime. Thanks.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.